Welcome to the Clear the Shelf podcast with Chris and Chris, the show that meets at the intersection of education and entertainment to discuss online arbitrage, retail arbitrage, wholesale, and all facets of selling on Amazon. We'll bring you news, tactics, strategies, insights, stories, and interviews to help you grow your Amazon business. And now, here are your hosts, Chris Grant and Chris Rasick. What is going on, Amazon sellers, and welcome back to the Clear the Shelf podcast with myself and my Xenodokial co-host, Chris Rasick. Today, we have a very special guest, Corey Ganim, or at Ganim Corey on Twitter. Corey's been around a while now. This is also not his first rodeo on the Clear the Shelf podcast. And Corey mainly focuses on wholesale. He drops a ton of great content focused on wholesale over on the Twitter, on his own podcast, and in the Wholesale Challenge, which begins in just a little over a week and a half on January 22nd. Sorry, not sorry for the shameless plug there. But our goal in this episode is to get Corey to kind of lay out the foundations of starting a wholesale business on Amazon for any beginner. Kind of our podcast version of a step-by-step guide. Before we dive in, though, this show isn't free. It may not cost you anything, but if you get something out of this episode, please consider paying us back by giving us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast player. Smash that thumbs up over on YouTube because it helps us a ton, and it gets us back behind the mic to create more shows like this for you good people. So, Corey, welcome to the show, man. I appreciate you taking some time and talking shop with us.
Yeah, well, Chris and Chris, thanks so much for having me, guys. Happy to be back. I think the first time we did this was maybe like April or so of last year. So we're coming up on probably a good 9 months or so since we had this conversation. So I think it's smart to kind of have another conversation, especially geared towards beginners, right? How can people start in wholesale? How can they scale their business? And how can they get in the game and start making some money? Absolutely.
So for those who may not have heard your last episode, I kind of want to start off the same way. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did 2023 play out for you? And maybe even further back, how did you get started on Amazon?
Yeah, so I'll start with like a 2023 recap. So 2023, we did, I believe, about 3.2 million in revenue, 100% wholesale, right? Buying from either directly from the manufacturer or buying from an authorized distributor and then reselling on Amazon. So to give the audience, I guess, a background on how I got to this point, we're going to have to go back to 2017, right? Which is right when I graduated from college. So I graduated from college on May 20th, 2017. And on May 21st, 2017, I started going to every single thrift store in my town, right? I stumbled upon a Reezy Resells video somewhere during my senior year of college. And I saw him. He was going to these thrift stores. He was scanning these used books and he was buying them for 50 cents, $1, $2, and then turning around and flipping them on Amazon for $20, some $50. Even some of these textbooks, as you guys know, can go for $100+. So it was really intriguing to me because I was like, wow, it looks relatively easy to start, right? It looks like anybody can do this. So that's exactly what I did. Right after college graduation, hit the thrift stores, started selling used books on Amazon, and started making a little kind of side money doing that. Now, if you fast forward 2 months after that, I was having to move to Chicago, where I was taking my first full-time job for a big tech company. And when I moved to Chicago, I didn't have my car, right? So there was really no efficient way for me to go to thrift stores and continue doing the business model that I was doing previously. So I was like, well, if I want to keep selling on Amazon, I'm going to have to find out another way to do it, right? Which led me to discover online arbitrage, and all this is around the time that tactical arbitrage, that tool, Chris, which I know you know very well, was coming on the scene. It was gaining in popularity. And that's actually how, Chris, you and I originally got connected, right? Through in the tactical arbitrage Facebook group. So at this point, we're mid 2017. I end up doing online arbitrage all the way up until the end of 2018. So just about a year and a half, which is when I discovered Amazon Wholesale. And the way that it was laid out for me, it made perfect sense, right? Because I stumbled upon a YouTube video from Watch Me Amazon, Larry Labarsky, and he breaks down the model and explains it in a way that's super easy to understand. So to try to reiterate that, it's essentially, let's say you have $5,000 in capital for inventory, right? You spend that $5,000 on wholesale inventory, it comes back to you as, let's say, $6,000. So then you spend that 6,000 on profitable wholesale inventory, and it comes back to you as, let's say, 7,200, right? And then you just repeat that process. You keep buying profitable inventory, you keep spending your capital, and you keep snowballing it into more and more money. And that business model was really intriguing to me because it was a lot less transactional than arbitrage. You have the ability to form relationships with your sales reps, and it's more of a like a B2B sales type position, right? You're looking to form relationships with these companies, not just buy from another retail website and flip a product for a quick buck. So again, I mean, you fast forward, that was 5 years ago to the day, actually, January 9th, 2019 is when we started in wholesale. Today is January 9th, 2024. So I'm literally 5 years to the day into wholesale.
Oh, nice. That's good. That's kind of a cool thing. Kind of cool to be recording a podcast on.
I just noticed that. Yeah, I was like, oh, it's January 9th. And it's funny because I remember like a lot of these dates, a lot of these like numbers pretty vividly. I don't know why, but I do. So it's cool.
Yeah, that's interesting. Just because I like a little bit of nostalgia, and one of my, I mean, I got started flipping books too, books and items from thrift stores. Do you have a particular book that you did very well with that sticks out in your memory?
So there's two books that stick out. One was the first one I ever bought, and one was the first one I ever sold. So the first one that I ever bought, I remember it was from the Salvation Army thrift store on Battleground Avenue in Greensboro, North Carolina, and it was a C++ coding textbook. And it looked old. In fact, it wasn't like a brand new textbook, and it ended up not even being a very good buy. But the reason it stuck out is because I scanned this book. I'm looking at the Keepa graph, and I'm just going back and forth, looking at the Keepa graph, looking at the book, Keepa graph, book. And it took me 10 minutes to decide whether or not to buy this product, right? I just could not make up my mind. And then I sat there, I'm like, dude, it's 50 cents, just buy it, right? So I bought it, sent it into FBA. It took a long time to sell, but eventually it sold. Now, the first book that I bought that ever sold was the Whole30 cookbook, which was, I think, a really trendy like diet fad at one point in time. I sourced that at the Value Village on High Point Road in Greensboro, North Carolina. And the only reason I bought it, it's funny because I saw it on the shelf and I didn't scan it. I just remember seeing one of Reezy's videos. He sourced that book from a thrift store in his town. So I was like, oh, Reezy sold this book. It's got to be profitable. So I bought it for $1, sent it into FBA. And then about 2 weeks later, I'm refreshing my seller app and I had a sale for $11.99. And it was the Whole30 cookbook. That was the first sale I ever made. Crazy to think about in hindsight that's kind of led to where we are today.
That's awesome. Yeah. So my favorite book flip ever was actually an architecture. It was like an architectural coffee table book. It was very, very big. And I ended up getting it for like $2. It was a Salvation Army in downtown Columbus, Ohio. And I ended up selling that one for like $249. That's probably awesome. One of my favorite flips. But one of the first like major home runs, and this is not something you can do nowadays. So if anyone's watching this and they're like, oh, I'm going to go do that. At another Salvation Army that was not too far from a nursing home, they had like 500 units of adult diapers.
Oh, and
yeah. They were selling them for 50 cents a package. And I was like, I will take every single one you have.
I have a feeling I know where you're going with this.
And I sold so many. And then several of them, I was surprised at how many of them shipped to Japan. And yeah, I was very, very surprised. And so then I did some Googling and I was like, I won't go into why, but it's a weird reason. It's kind of gross, but there are a lot of them went to Japan, but we absolutely crushed with those adult diapers. That's probably one of my biggest scores.
For a quick second, I thought that you were about to say you saw the adult diapers at the thrift store and then you walked down the street and sold them to the nursing home. That's what I thought you were about to say. I was like, honestly, that would be a solid move, but I'm now realizing that's more than likely the source.
Yeah. All right. So now that we've got all that out of the way, let's put this kind of beginner guide together for everybody, and hopefully we put this kind of in a format where we kind of go right down the process. We need to start off with differentiating wholesale from retail arbitrage, online arbitrage, private label, and drop shipping. Can you kind of explain the differences for people who might want to get started?
Yeah, definitely. And this is and this is like a, not necessarily a question, but like a comment that I get all the time, right? I tell people I sell on Amazon, and I'm sure you guys get this as well. Their response, not like 7 times out of 10 is, oh, so you mean drop shipping? And it's like, well, not necessarily, right? So let's define each of those and then talk about the differences. So first, you've got arbitrage, right? And really, there's two ways to do arbitrage. Like you said, you can do retail arbitrage or you can do online arbitrage. So arbitrage is simply the act of buying low in one market and selling high in another. And in the context of retail arbitrage, that would be buying products from retail stores like a Target, like a Walmart, like a Dick's Sporting Goods, and then turning around and flipping them on Amazon. Now, online arbitrage, exact same concept, except instead of buying from the physical retail store, like walking into the store and buying a product off clearance, we're buying those same products, but we're buying them from the retail website, Target.com, Walmart.com, etc. So that's arbitrage. Then you've got private label, which in private label, you are creating your own brand from scratch. You're differentiating on an existing product and bringing a brand new product and a brand new brand to market, right? So you're having to invest a lot of money up front in getting a product created and getting samples made and designing your packaging, investing money into marketing. And like I said, essentially launching a brand new product into the marketplace. So it's a lot higher risk because it's a lot more capital intensive, but the potential rewards are really high as well, right? Because a lot of successful private label sellers, they can have much higher margins. They can exit their brands down the road if they choose to sell them, right? And then next, we've got drop shipping. So drop shipping, I think is, for whatever reason, is misunderstood by a lot of people, especially in the Amazon space. So in a drop shipping business, trying to think of how to explain this correctly. So in a drop shipping business, let's say I list a product for sale on Amazon, right? Now, I don't necessarily have possession of that product, but I have the ability to purchase that product. So let's say I list the product for sale on Amazon and I make a sale for, let's say, $20, right? So when that order comes into my Amazon account, I then go and find that product, let's say from another retailer, another wholesaler, and then I turn around and have that retailer or that wholesaler what's called drop ship that order to my customer, right? So I don't have to buy that inventory until my customer has already paid me. Now, a quick caveat is that Amazon is very harsh against drop shipping from other retailers, right? So in previous years, you could get away with drop shipping from, let's say, Walmart.com or Target.com, but Amazon really started to crack down on this. And it makes sense, right? Because if an Amazon customer is buying a product from Amazon.com and that product shows up in a Target box or a Walmart box, that is a terrible customer experience, and Amazon will shut you down immediately for that, and they will not allow you back up. So drop shipping is very much within terms of service if you're drop shipping from a legitimate wholesaler or distributor that knows how to comply with Amazon's policies, which is essentially just shipping the product in like a blank box, right? So that way the customer just thinks it came from Amazon. All right. So that's drop shipping. Now let's finish with talking about wholesale. So again, wholesale, out of all the four models that we're discussing here, wholesale is by far my favorite model. I think it's the most scalable. I think it has the most long-term potential, and it's also been around for a very long time.
Hey guys, wanted to take a quick second and thank you for listening to the Clear the Shelf podcast. My magnanimous co-host Chris Rasick has put together a gift for you for being a listener. It's called the Monthly Goal Tracking Spreadsheet, and it's free. The spreadsheet will help you break down and track how much you've purchased, which should be a leading indicator of how much you will sell, and then you'll be able to track how much you've sold as well as your estimated monthly profit on a daily basis. This will all feed into the daily averages so you can ensure that you're on track to meet your goals each and every month. Grab it for free today over at cleartheshelf.com/goal-tracking. Thanks again for being a listener. Now back to the show.
So in a wholesale business, it's very similar to arbitrage. We're buying low and selling high, but the only difference is in an arbitrage context, we're buying from another retailer, right? We're buying from a Target or a Walmart. But in a wholesale context, we're buying either directly from the manufacturer or we're buying from an authorized distributor. So we're able to go right to the source, get wholesale pricing, buy in bulk, form a relationship with our sales rep or with the company, and in some cases, position ourselves for exclusivity on certain products or certain brands, which has massive long-term potential. So that's a very long-winded way of explaining those four models. If you want me to go any deeper on those, I'm happy to.
No, I think that's pretty good to get started with.
Yeah. So let's cut right to the chase and get to one of what for most people is probably going to be the biggest hurdle that people see in starting wholesale. There's a difference between a 50-cent book at Salvation Army and approaching a wholesaler or a distributor and establishing a relationship. However, it's not quite as big as people make it in their mind. People,
Right.
essentially, I'm talking about capital, starting capital. How much money do I need to start wholesale?
Yeah, and that's a great question. It's definitely one of the most common ones that I get. And I think it's a huge limiting belief for sellers that are looking to add wholesale to their business, right? Because I think a lot of sellers think, oh, I've got to have 20K or 30K or even 50K or more for a wholesaler to take me seriously, right? Or to meet a minimum order from a certain manufacturer, for example. But in reality, you really only need anywhere from 5K on the low end up to 10K in order to effectively get into wholesale. Now, a couple of caveats there. The more capital that you have, the better, because the quicker you're going to be able to snowball that capital, right? So if you're only starting out with, let's say, 5K, it's going to take a lot longer to snowball that into, let's say, 20, 30, 50K than it would be if you started with, let's say, 15K, for example, right? But on the other hand, I know plenty of people that have successfully started wholesale with, let's say, 2K or 3K, right? So it all depends on what you have. You want to make do with what you have. But if you only have, let's say, a couple $1,000s, I would do arbitrage, for example, to kind of build up that capital to then deploy into wholesale.
That's perfect. Let me do a follow up to that. Capital is one of the kind of the limiting beliefs about getting into wholesale, but I think one of the other ones is, well, if I've got 5K or even 10K, I know that I'm going to have to, rip one PO. And for those who don't know, PO stands for purchase order. I'm going to rip one PO, and that's going to be all my capital. It's going to be tied up in maybe one or two ASINs. Is that actually the case, or are there much lower minimum order quantities? Can you spread the orders over multiple SKUs? How does that work?
Yeah, so again, I think that is another limiting belief of newer sellers that want to break into wholesale, right? Maybe they have the capital required to get into wholesale, but they have that limiting belief of, oh, well, I'm going to have to spend it all on one or two products, and that's too risky for me, so therefore I don't want to start. So that is not the case at all. So like I said, we've been doing wholesale for 5 years as of today. We work with a lot of big distributors. We work with some small distributors. We work with some big manufacturers. We work with some small manufacturers. Every single one that we work with has a very low or no minimum order, right? So I could spend $200 with my supplier if I want, and they're going to be thankful for the order. So I think that, sure, there are plenty of suppliers out there that have high minimums. Some have 5, 10, some have $50,000 minimum order requirements. But for the most part, that's not going to be an issue, right? And it's the same thing that I know you guys preach on the arbitrage side, is like, you don't have to go super deep into one or two products when you're starting out in wholesale. In fact, I think you should do the opposite. You can still go wide in a wholesale context. So instead of buying, a bunch of one or two products, test out a few of, let's say, 5, 7, 10 different products, and you're going to be able to do that just as effectively in wholesale as you could in an arbitrage business.
Perfect. So this next question is people are gonna think it's a little bit of a softball, but don't worry, we've got the exact the counter question to this coming up as well. In your opinion, what are some of the benefits of choosing wholesale over any of the other models that are available to you to sell on Amazon?
So this is something that I alluded to earlier, right? When I was talking about one of the differences between arbitrage and wholesale. So let's start there, right? So in an arbitrage business, it's very transactional, right? If I'm going to be buying a product from, let's say, Walmart or Target or Kohl's or Dick's Sporting Goods, there's no way for me to form a relationship with Walmart or with Target or with Kohl's or with Dick's Sporting Goods. I'm always going to be looking for the next opportunity, which is great, right? And there's always going to be those next opportunities, but there's got to be somebody there to find them. So when you contrast that with wholesale, wholesale gives you the opportunity to form relationships with your sales reps, with the owners of some of these companies, right? Like I have like text message basis relationships with some of these brand owners that we've been buying from for years. So in a wholesale context, these relationships that you're forming with your sales rep, with the brand owners, with your suppliers, that is your moat, right? That is the barrier to entry that other competing sellers are going to have to overcome if they want to compete with you. Whereas with arbitrage, there's really no barrier to entry. Anybody else can find that opportunity and compete with you all in the same day. Whereas I've got relationships with some of my wholesale suppliers that I've been working with for 2, 3, some of them 5 years now. And they tell me, hey, we get hit up by 20 Amazon sellers a week, but we turn them away because we know you, we work with you for a long time, and we're comfortable with our relationship, right? So I think the biggest benefit is that ability to form those relationships, which is essentially your moat around your business.
Yeah, that's interesting. And not to mention the ability to simply call on those relationships to restock instead of hopping in a car and run into a clearance section.
And that's another huge advantage. So I should have mentioned that. So like, for example, last week, right, we had one of our wholesale suppliers that they're a huge national distributor for brands like Motorola, Samsung, Philips, like these huge consumer electronics brands. And they get really good deals in all the time. So this is a supplier we've been working with, not for super long, maybe 6 months or so. But the sales rep shot me a message on WhatsApp. He said, hey, Corey, we've got this Wi-Fi router, right, that just came in. We haven't sent them to any of our buyers yet. Do you want the first crack at them? And it was a really good deal. We immediately bought 1,000 units at $38.50 per unit, wired in $38,500 that day, and we've got the product in stock now, right? So that is something that it would take you a whole day, maybe even a whole week, to spend 38 grand via arbitrage, whether it's retail arbitrage or online arbitrage. But in wholesale, with those relationships in place, you can spend really ungodly amounts of money with a text message, right?
Yeah, that's quite an advantage. But let's all right, so let's play devil's advocate. Mm-hmm. What are the most significant disadvantages to the model?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you're bringing that up, right? Because I mean, every business has pros and cons. So let's take a second and highlight some of the cons of the wholesale model. So one of the biggest cons by far is going to be just cash flow, right? Plain and simple. It is a very capital intensive business. I mean, we're outlaying, like I said, tens of thousands of dollars on a weekly basis, sometimes even more than that. And sometimes it's taking 30, 60, sometimes even up to 90 days for us to get our cash back, right? Because of sometimes the lead time from some of these suppliers, the amount of time it takes for the products to sell, the amount of time it takes us to get paid by Amazon. So really managing your cash flow is going to be the biggest pain and one of the biggest cons to this business, right? Because there's just a lot of cash to be managed. Another con that I think is worth mentioning is, although you've got a moat around your business by having relationships with some of these suppliers, you are essentially at the mercy of your suppliers at the end of the day, right? My best supplier, even though we've got a great relationship, even though we've been working together for years, at any time, for whatever reason, they could just call me up and say, hey, Corey, the manufacturers we work with, they said we're not allowed to sell to Amazon sellers anymore, so we got to cut you off, right? And then boom, there goes 25% of my revenue overnight. So even though you've got these relationships, you're always at the mercy of your suppliers, which is why it helps to have a diverse supplier mix and not have all of your eggs in one supplier basket, if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah, I like that. One of the things that kind of stops people before they even get started, I think, is all the worries behind kind of getting an account set up, making sure that all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed. What do you think some of the key steps are in setting up your Amazon account specifically for wholesale selling, or even the way you structure your corporation or LLC or any other accounts or things that are important in your business?
Yeah, so as far as setting up your Amazon account for a wholesale business, it's really no different than having a seller account geared towards arbitrage or geared towards private label, right? So that side is going to look exactly the same. Now, I think where talking about like setup and having a good foundation in place makes a difference on the wholesale side is when it comes to your business finances. So this is something that I've talked about at length before in some of my content. We implement the profit first framework for our business finances. And now for those of you that aren't aware of Profit First, it is a book by Mike Michalowicz. And there's even a Profit First for e-commerce business owners, which is like essentially a variation on that book. Highly, highly, highly recommend if you're in the e-commerce space or if you own a business in general, you check out that book. So here's the gist of how it works, right? We've got 5 different bank accounts for our business, and each of those bank accounts has its own credit card, right? So for example, we've got an inventory bank account that's a checking account. So every 2 weeks when we get paid by Amazon, the money goes into that account. And then from there, we then divvy it up into our other accounts, right? So we've got an inventory account, a tax account, a profit account, an operating expenses account, and then a prep slash 3PL account, right? So when the money comes in from Amazon, we divvy it up into each of those buckets, is what I like to call them. And then each of those buckets has a corresponding credit card that is paid off each month by one of those accounts. So again, without getting too much into the weeds, we've got to have a system in place for managing your business finances, especially because of how capital intensive this business is. You always want to make sure that every dollar is accounted for and that every dollar has a purpose. Is kind of the way I like to look at it.
Nice. You mind if I ask what percentages you use for each one of your buckets?
No, not at all. So it very much differs month to month, and we run Profit First a little different than the way he advocates in the book. So each month, let's just say our operating expenses are on average $25,000 a month. So if we get paid by Amazon every 2 weeks, we're essentially getting paid twice a month. So disbursement comes in from Amazon. I'm immediately taking half of my operating expenses for that month and putting it into the OpEx account, right? So I know the premise behind Profit First is to take your profit first, but I want to make sure I keep the lights on. So I immediately fund that OpEx account with $12,500 every time I get paid by Amazon. Next, I'm going to fund that tax account, which is going to be usually put anywhere from 8 to 10% of each disbursement into that tax account. It's not perfect, but it ends up being a little more conservative. So typically towards the end of the year, we've got a lot more money in that tax account than we need to pay our tax bill. So if we have that excess, we just put the excess into the profit account and take it as a dividend, right? And then we'll take usually on average 3 to 5% of that disbursement and put it into profit. We'll usually take about 2% and put it into the prep slash 3PL bucket. And then whatever's left, which ends up being in the neighborhood of like 65 to 70%, goes back into inventory. So with that system, we're able to take healthy profit every 2 weeks. The operating expenses bucket pays my salary, and then everything else is covered, and then everything left over goes back in inventory.
Nice. And then last question, just because I'm curious. I know that out of those 5 accounts, taxes would be the only one that's really kind of a long-term account because you only have to pay that once a year. Well, maybe you pay quarterly. I don't know. But do you put that portion into like a high yield savings account or anything?
I don't, but I should. That's the answer.
Okay.
The profit account and the tax account are 2 just regular business savings accounts at our bank, right? So in fact, somebody DM'd me this week with that exact question. He was like, "Hey, I watched your Profit First video. Have you considered putting your tax and your savings account into a high yield savings account? Because they're essentially you're just parking that money." And my reply was, "I know I should do that. I just haven't done it yet." So,
I wouldn't be surprised to find out that Michalowicz had a similar system that I did back in the bachelor pad, where I had the envelope system, where you come home from waiting tables and you put money in the rent envelope and whatever's left goes in the concert ticket envelope or whatnot. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if you had a system like that. Sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it?
Well, and I think I wish people would implement that like with their personal finances too. That's something that I've tried to do on like the personal finance side and really automate that as much as possible. Like when I pay myself my paycheck for my Amazon business every 2 weeks, I have a certain percentage that automatically gets invested, certain amount that goes to the emergency fund, certain amount that goes to my living expenses. So I think that's a system that can and should be applied across the board, like business and personal.
Yeah, absolutely. My wife has something similar, but she usually spends too much profit first. And
Right.
Scramble to try to get the rest of the bills paid.
It happens.
So again, we're talking to primarily the beginners, right? So let's think about how they enter the space. They're not going to have the luxury of a relationship, getting a text message through WhatsApp, right? These are probably, people who go to a trade show and have a list of suppliers and distributors that they're trying to establish relationships with, or maybe they're looking in the yellow pages at local if they want to stay local with distributors and wholesalers or whatnot. So say you break through and you get that list, that product list. How do you actually decide what's good and what you want to buy?
Yeah, so this is, I wouldn't call it a mistake, right? Because this is a really good way to learn, but this is, let's call it an approach that I took for the first probably 3.5 years before realizing there was a better way. So this is what's a very common path of newer wholesale sellers. They do a lot of work to find a bunch of suppliers. They contact all the suppliers. They end up landing a couple of accounts, and then they get, let's say, a 2,000, 5,000, 25,000 line price list from one of these distributors, because some of these distributors carry hundreds of brands and tens of thousands of products. So new sellers sitting there staring at an Excel spreadsheet of 20,000 products, and they're completely overwhelmed. So what do they start doing? They start going line by line, product by product, just comparing the price of the product on the spreadsheet to the price of the product on Amazon. And they do that until they have a winner or until they get burned out, right? And unfortunately, most sellers burn out before they find a winner. So there's actually a much better and more efficient way. And that is this. So in that scenario, you've got this huge price list. Most suppliers are going to have a column on that price list with a brand name in it, right? And even if they don't, most suppliers on their website are going to have a list of the brands that they carry. And even if they don't have that on their website, you can always reach out to your sales rep and say, hey, Mr. Sales Rep, could you just shoot me over a list of maybe, let's say, your top 20 brands that you guys sell, right? Bottom line, you need to get a list of the brands that they carry or some of their best-selling brands. So you've got this list of brands, right? Now, instead of going down the list line by line, you go back to Amazon, or you could use a tool called Smart Scout, or Keep a Product Finder does this as well. But the bottom line is we want to look for the best-selling products from those brands first, and then almost reverse search those on the price list. So to you, I love using the brand Milwaukee as an example. Milwaukee tools, we sell a lot of Milwaukee tools. So let's say you're reaching out to a tool distributor. You get the tool distributor's price list. It's 20,000 lines long, but you know that tool distributor carries Milwaukee. So what I'm going to do first is instead of looking at the list, I'm going to go on Amazon.com and I'm just going to type the word Milwaukee in, and I'm going to search the tool category. Now, that's going to typically Amazon's algorithm is going to show you like the better selling products from a given brand at the top of the search results. So I'm going to make a short list of the best selling products from Milwaukee that I see that I want to buy, right? So assuming I can get a good price on this product, I want to buy it. So I'm going to put it on my short list. So let's say I do that for all the Milwaukee products that I want to buy. Now, maybe I have a short list of, let's say 20, 25, 30 different Milwaukee products that I want to source. So now that I've got my short list, now I go back to that 20,000 line price list from that distributor, and I'm just looking for those specific Milwaukee products on that price list, right? Now, when I do that, like two things are going to happen. One, they're going to have that product and it may or may not be profitable, right? So if they have it and it's profitable, I buy it. If they have it and it's not profitable, then I'll either try to negotiate it or I'll just go down to the next product, right? Now, two is we know they carry Milwaukee, the brand, but they don't have that specific Milwaukee product in stock. So instead of just taking that at face value, I'm going to go back to my sales rep and I'm going to say, hey, Mr. Sales Rep, I see you guys carry Milwaukee. I've got a lot of Milwaukee products that I want to buy. Could you possibly special order this specific product from Milwaukee for me, right? And could you get me a quote on that? And like 9 times out of 10, if they carry Milwaukee, they will be able to special order you any product from Milwaukee. So the sales rep is typically going to say like, oh yeah, let me check with my Milwaukee rep. I'll get back to you with a quote, right? So then you just took like what would take weeks, like literally weeks to go through that price list line by line. And you just made that process 100 times more efficient and possibly found a profitable lead there within your first like 15 to 20 minutes.
And it's custom too. There's advantages
Yep.
to that. That's a really good hack.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that one. So we've talked about price lists, how to find profitable products, but now I want to pull back just a little bit because I know the question that's going to be on people's minds next is, well, that's great if I have a supplier, but I don't know how to find any suppliers. Yeah. What are some ways to kind of research suppliers and identify them? And then as a follow-up to that, before you even answer it, is there any tips, tricks, software tools, or products that can maybe even make the process easier?
Yeah. So, and in fact, we probably should have started with this, right? Because it's like, you've got to have your supplier before you can source your products. And just as a side note too, so for those of you listening to this, there's going to be an entire day of the wholesale challenge dedicated to finding suppliers. So I think that's day 2, right, Chris, where we spend the entire session showing you guys exactly how to find suppliers. So I'll give you kind of a tidbit of what we covered during that session. So when looking for suppliers, you're either going to be looking to go directly to the manufacturer, or you're going to be looking to buy from a distributor, right? So there's best practices depending on which route you take. So let's say you want to go directly to the manufacturer, but first you don't even know which manufacturers to go for. So I like to use Smart Scout, which is a tool that it's a all-encompassing tool, but I like to use it to find brands that I want to sell. So within Smart Scout, there's a brands feature that lists every single brand carried on Amazon. I like to choose a particular category. So if we use that same example from earlier, tools, I just filter to show me every brand in the tools category. And then I like to set a couple of filters at the column level. So I like to say, all right, show me tool brands where Amazon is on the listings across the board less than 60% of the time, right? So that's going to filter out any brands that are dominated by Amazon. Next, I'm going to set a filter to show me brands that have a minimum of at least 3 FBA sellers on average across all the brands listings, right? And now a newer seller might be listening to this and thinking to themselves, well, like, why would you want at least 3 FBA sellers? Like, why would you be looking for competition? Well, the reality is I want to see competition, because if there are other FBA sellers selling that brand and selling that product, then more than likely that brand is, 1, they're reseller friendly, and 2, if other FBA sellers are selling the product, they're buying it at a profit from somewhere, which means that more than likely I will be able to do the same, right? And now the third and final filter that I set within Smart Scout, this one is not 100% necessary, but I like to do it just to kind of further tailor my results. I set the monthly revenue threshold to a minimum of 40K per month and a maximum of 500K per month, right? Because typically brands within those thresholds are going to be, they're not going to be big enough where they've got like their own in-house Amazon department, but they're not small enough to where it's insignificant, right? So if I can land one of those accounts, I know that more than likely it's going to be profitable and I'm going to be able to sell those products. So that is how we find brands to contact, right? And if you put those filters into Smart Scout, depending on the category, you're going to get anywhere from 200 to up to about 1,000 very specific brands that meet those criteria that you can then literally go down the list and call one by one. And Chris, I promise you, I bet every dollar to my name, if somebody sat down and called 100 brands from one of those categories using those filters, they will have a 6-figure wholesale business in 30 days. I promise you. Like, somebody do it and prove me wrong. I promise you. So
that's big. That's a big statement. I like it.
Well, I mean, so, like, it's impossible not to win if you do that. Like, that's how confident I am. And again, that we cover that in detail during the challenge. So when it comes to finding distributors, you might think this is a cop-out answer, but bear with me, okay? Google is going to be your best bet for finding the best distributors in your town. Now, I like to go to Google and I like to use a very simple set of search terms. I just Google category name, distributor, your city or town, right? So for example, one of my prep centers is located down in Savannah, Georgia. So I might Google grocery distributor, Savannah, Georgia. And that's going to give me hundreds of pages of results. Now, here's a tip for you guys. The best distributors are typically going to be buried in the Google search results. They're not going to be on page 1. They're going to be on page 3, page 8, page 15, because these really good, profitable distributors, they're not worried about having to get their name on page 1 of Google. They've got so much business. They've been around for so long. Typically, they haven't updated their website since like 2001, right? Like, my number 1 tool distributor, if you looked at their website, you'd be like, a kindergartner put this together back in like 1998. It's that bad, but they're incredibly profitable. We do a ton of business with them. And I bet they're on page like 8 of Google, even if you search like their name. So that's a tip there, right? Now, when you get these Google search results, you're going to be running them through a couple of criteria. So the first thing that you want to verify when let's say you Google those search terms, you come across a website and you're trying to decide, hey, is this distributor legit? The first thing you want to make sure of is, 1, do they carry brand name products that are already selling well on Amazon, right? So that's the first thing. Pretty much every distributor is going to have their list of brands on their website. So a lot of times you're going to recognize the brand names, right? You know that they're already selling well. But if it's more of a niche supplier, you might have to search some of those brand names on Amazon. And maybe you search a couple of those brands and you say, okay, this distributor, they carry a couple of brands. I haven't heard of these brands, but I see them on Amazon and they're selling. So therefore, they're probably a good fit, right? So that's the first criteria. Second criteria is they've got to be business to business, right? 100% B2B. Now, the reason you want them to be B2B is because distributors that only sell to other businesses are only going to sell in bulk. They're going to have wholesale pricing. They're going to be easier to work with, right? There's some distributors out there will sell to both businesses and end consumers. And just in my experience, distributors that sell also to end consumers tend to have worse pricing, right? They're used to selling at retail in some cases. So the third and final criteria is they've got to sell primarily to retail businesses, right? And I'll give you an example of why that's important. So there was a distributor that we contacted. This was a couple of years ago, and they met the first two criteria perfectly. They carried a bunch of big brand name products that sold really well on Amazon. They were 100% B2B. But when I looked at the types of customers that they normally sell to, it was the government, hospitals, and schools, right? Those three types of companies are like their target customer. So when I contacted them and I wanted to try to work with them, even though we could have done a lot of business with them, they said to me like, hey, Corey, we don't usually sell to retailers. We usually sell to government, schools, healthcare systems. Not a good fit. Sorry. And they denied my account, right? So when that supplier is used to selling to retail businesses, which we are, it's a much easier conversation because they know how your business works. They know what kind of margins you need. They know how you operate, and it's a much easier conversation for both you and the supplier. Does that make sense?
Nice. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I want to tell a little story here. So while you were talking, I was listening, but I went out to Google and I just typed in grocery distributor, Orlando, Florida. All right. And at the very top of the page, of course, I get the Google Maps. I get I get some sponsored stuff. I get some yellow pages. I decided to hit Google has infinite scroll now, but they require you to hit more results. So I hit more results 6 times. All right. And on the 6th page, I just clicked on the very first listing that popped up there. The website is junk. It looks horrible. But it says right at the top of the page on their website, wholesale. And they do all international foods. So
I love international foods.
Yeah.
Gold mine.
In literally 3 minutes, I found a place that's local to me that has Brazilian, British, and a bunch of other foods. I've even got I've got a guide pulled up here, 112 pages of different products that they carry. Of course, there's no prices on it because you got to call to get the actual prices. But I've also got an 800 number to call and actually speak to a person. And it literally took me while you were telling people how to do this.
So, and Chris, let's take that a step further, right? So even if I'm a brand new seller, I could place an order with that supplier. It's 1:06 p.m. right now. I could have a purchase order in that supplier's hand by before 5 p.m. today. And this is exactly how I would do it. So like you said, you've got essentially a catalog of the products and the brands that particular distributor carries. So now what I would do is what I mentioned earlier. I would go to Amazon. I would type a couple of those brand names into Amazon, and I would put together a short list of, let's say, 3 to 5 products from 3 to 5 brands that I would be interested in purchasing. I would look at the Keepa graph. I would crunch some quick numbers and figure out how many I need to buy of each product to have about 30 days worth of stock, right? So that exercise might take me an hour to do. After an hour, I've got, like I said, possibly up to 25 different products that I'm looking to purchase. So then I'm going to get on the phone. I'm going to call that supplier that you just mentioned, and I'm going to say, hey guys, my name's Corey Ganim. I own a retail business. I'm down here in Orlando, Florida. Stumbled upon your website. I see some of the brands you guys carry. I love those brands. In fact, I've got a buy list. I'm looking at essentially a shopping list here in front of me of some products from those brands that I'm interested in purchasing. I've got the exact quantities that I'm ready to buy. I just need a quote. So could you tell me who I should send this list over to? Right. And they will not care if you're an Amazon seller. They won't care. They won't care anything. All they hear in their ears are, this guy's ready to buy. I need to get him pricing. I'm going to do everything in my power to get this order in my books before the end of the day. Right. So if they're on top of it and if they're hungry too, they're immediately going to get you a quote, and you could have a PO in their system before 5 p.m. That is how it's done. It's not that hard, and people really just overcomplicate the process.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think some newer sellers they're so busy figuring out why it won't work. They forget the fact that these are salesmen. Like this is
Right.
what they want to do. This is the whole point of it all. It kind
Like
of gets lost sometimes.
you're talking to commission salespeople. Like it is in their best
Right.
interest for you to buy product. So that I think that's another big mistake that newer sellers make is they get almost like the balance of power wrong, right? They think that these sales reps are doing them a favor by giving them account or by allowing to sell to them. When in reality, it's like, listen, you're the customer, you're the buyer, you're ready to spend money with them. If anything, they should be begging for your business. And when you come at them with that approach that I just mentioned, where you're very specific, you know exactly what you want, you're framing things in terms of what is going to put money in their pocket, they're going to bend over backwards to work with you. And all it takes is that you get that one order in with them under your belt, you get that first order in, and they're going to start sending you leads. You're going to become their new favorite customer because you're a new customer that just appeared out of thin air, right? Like you literally just walked in the door and put money in their pocket, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. It can't be overstated. So Corey, while you were talking, I gave you the courtesy of giving you my full attention, unlike my co-host.
I don't blame you. I tend to drag on, so it's all good.
But you mentioned business to business, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I want to make sure that the beginner who's thinking of getting started or just getting started doesn't frame this in a vacuum, thinking it's a one-on-one relationship. These companies do sell to other businesses. So I want to see if you have any tips on cultivating that relationship. Like how do you get the favoritism to get text messages like you got?
So, and again, this might sound like a cop-out answer, but it's literally just being a normal human being and trying to form a legitimate relationship with your point of contact at that supplier, right? So I wish I had some hack of like, oh, you send them like this message on this day and this is what you say. But it's as simple as like me with my sales reps, I might just call them up every week or two and say, hey, how you doing? Just checking in. And even if I'm not ready to buy something right then and there, I might say like, hey, we're looking over your most recent list. Don't have an order for you right this second, but just wanted to touch base, right? How are you doing? How are your kids doing? And just finding common ground that you can build rapport over, right? But at the end of the day, like at the same time, money talks, and the more orders I'm placing with them, the more money I'm spending with them, the easier it is to do that, right? So I say if you're a brand new seller and you're talking to a supplier and you haven't yet placed that first order, yes, you want to build rapport. Yes, you want them to like you, but focus on getting that first order in with that supplier and then go heavy on the rapport building, right? Because once you have that order, it's so much easier to build that rapport long term. They're going to want to take your calls. They're going to want to shoot the shit with you on, at 1 p.m. on a Tuesday. It just gets easier once you're doing business with them.
Yeah. You tend to like people better if they make you some money, right?
Right. Exactly.
Absolutely. Now, just for my own, just because I need to know, with your suppliers, with the sales guys that you talk to, do you use the Michael Scott system of having a note card and like you highlight things in green so that to go ahead and stop talking about that with those people or anything like that?
So I use, and Chris, I know we were talking before the call about Todoist. So I'm a Todoist fanatic. I've got all of my to-do list, a lot of just like kind of like sticky notes on my Todoist. And so what I like to do is I like to set a recurring task on my Todoist to follow up with my best sales reps every X amount of time, right? So that might be every 2 weeks. I've got a task on my Todoist. It's going to say, hey, Corey, today's Tuesday. You got to call up Justin at XYZ supplier. Here are a couple of quick notes on what you guys normally talk about. Here's his kid's name. Here's what he did last time you talked, right? Just very quick, like cliff notes, so that when I call up Justin, I say, hey, man, how's it going? I know your kid had that soccer game last time we talked. How did he do, right? Just like super simple stuff like that, where like if you can remember literally one snippet of your previous conversation, they think you're like, oh my God, how did you remember that, right? Because they talk to so many people each day, like they don't remember what you talked about. So the fact that you remember it, they're thinking like, oh, maybe I need to pay more attention to this guy, right? And I mean, that goes for anything. I mean, I know when I'm having a conversation with somebody and they followed up with me, if they reference something that I said last time we spoke, even though like that's my own tactic, I'm like, dang, like this guy, like he's on it, right? He's trying to get my attention. He's trying to win my business. Like I respect that. And they feel the same way.
Perfect. So we've talked about, finding profitable products. We've talked about finding suppliers, but the next thing is we need to sell these products, and we need to sell them at a profit.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some pricing strategies that you've used to make sure that you sell through product and it's not sitting and becoming stale, but you're also keeping, a healthy profit margin so you can pay yourself every month?
Yeah. So when it comes to pricing, now this is not like, I'm not an expert when it comes to pricing or repricing or anything like that, but I'll give you one of my biggest tips for like that we've implemented that's increased our profit margin by anywhere from 0.5% to 1% every month. And now some of you might be thinking, well, 0.5%, like what is that going to do? Well, at scale, that can sometimes end up being a lot of money. And it is called the yo-yo repricing method. Now, this is something that, as far as I understand, most repricers on the market will have this feature either built in or will allow you to configure this feature into your settings. The repricer that I use, it's called Seller Snap. Seller Snap has a pre-made preset where I can literally just choose the yo-yo method as my preset for a given ASIN, and it will implement it automatically. So how it works is, let's say there's a product that I'm selling at $30 routinely, right? Buy box is right around $30. And let's say that in my repricer, I've got my maximum price set to, let's just say $37, right? So the yo-yo method will take my price from that $30 where it normally sits at. It'll jump it to my max price of $37 every 3 hours, and it'll hold it there at my max price for 20 minutes. Now, what we found, and then so after that 20 minutes is up, it'll go right back down to the normal price, competing with everybody else, and then it'll repeat every 3 hours. And so what we found is that in that 20-minute window, every 3 hours, we will make sales at our max price. In fact, there's been examples in our business where our max price might be $15, $20, $25 above the buy box, and we will still make sales at that max price sometimes during that 20-minute window. So, I mean, you can do the math, right? If you've got a repricer that you're paying X amount for per month, this one yo-yo strategy in and of itself can end up paying for your repricer every month just by implementing that strategy. I mean, I know, again, Seller Snap is not a cheap tool at all. It's a high-end tool, but this one yo-yo repricing strategy in and of itself pays for Seller Snap every month within the first 6 days, right? So that one strategy, regardless of what tool you're using, highly recommend you implement that strategy.
And I think something people need to know is, so I know a lot of times we get really in the weeds when it comes to looking at Keepa charts, and because it's just it's the best data that we have, and I don't think, especially newer sellers, I don't think they necessarily understand that Keepa does not grab everything. So if you think that, oh well, the price is normally around $35, and Corey, you're saying, well, I'll get sales $15 above the $35 buy box. It's because there are regional buy boxes. There are all these different kinds of reasons that you can get these sales, and they're not going to be picked up by Keepa just because of the way the Keepa gathers data on Amazon. Right. And so, there's a lot of nuance there we could go into.
Yeah, Corey, let's talk about the actual process of getting the products from your source and getting them into the hands of Amazon customers, the actual fulfillment of the process. How does that work? How do you get it from your source to the Amazon fulfillment center and then to the customer?
Yeah, so good question. So we really have two ways that we end up getting products to customers. So at this point in our business, like I said, 5 years today into wholesale, a lot of these suppliers that we work with are willing to ship our purchases directly to Amazon for us, right? So in a situation like that, let's say we place a $10,000 order with our wholesale supplier. We will then just email them the shipping labels and the box labels to slap onto that order. Those boxes go straight to Amazon. Amazon will prep for us, right, for a fee. And then once Amazon is done with the prep process and the products are available for sale, that's when customers can buy them, right? So that's essentially option one. That's best case scenario. It's very hands off. All we've got to do is buy, and then a week or two later, they're available for sale on Amazon. Scenario two, which is still fully hands off, right? Allowed me not to touch a product in the last, 3+ years, is let's say we place an order with our supplier. Supplier will ship to our prep center, or commonly called a 3PL, right? We'll ship to our prep center. Our prep center will then label the products, put the products in boxes, slap the box and pallet labels on, and then ship those to Amazon that way, right? And then when Amazon receives them, they start to sell. So those are kind of the two avenues that you can take. That's why I like to say my business is fully remote, because I don't have to see products. I don't have to touch products. Either my supplier ships directly to Amazon for me, or they ship to my prep center, which then forwards my inventory to Amazon.
How do you decide between the two? Whether it's the cost that involved between the prep center or having Amazon do it? Yeah,
good question. So we would like to default to it. Listen, if it was up to me, our suppliers would ship 100% of our stuff straight to Amazon. If it were up to me, we would never use a prep center. Some suppliers just aren't willing to apply our labels. Like some of these big national distributors, they have their fulfillment processes in place. They're not going to pause their whole warehouse to send somebody out there and slap a couple labels on a box, right? So in those cases, we have no choice but to send to our prep center. Now, the other scenario where the supplier would not ship directly to Amazon, where we would have them ship to our prep center, is in the scenario where we are selling bundles or multi-packs, right? So Amazon will not bundle products for you. They will not create multi-packs for you. We do sell a lot of bundles and multi-packs. So in those cases, we've got to ship those products first to our prep center, and then our prep center will turn around and forward those to Amazon.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So after all of this, the next kind of step that I think you really need to think about is probably some inventory management. We've got the order fulfillment taken care of. We know how to find suppliers. We know how to butter up our suppliers. But what do we need to do to make sure that inventory is not getting stale? And if it is, what's our exit strategy? And what's our strategy for replenishing the products that have done well for us over the years, and kind of making sure that we know where in the cycle all of that inventory is?
Yeah. So again, I think this is a part of the process that people tend to overcomplicate, but it comes down to simply doubling down on your winners and cutting your losers. So let's say that we send a product into Amazon, it's starting to sell, and maybe it's not set. Maybe the buy box price is a lot lower than we expected it, right? So it's not nearly as profitable as we thought it would be. And we decide, hey, we've just got to sell through this product, get our money back so that we can reinvest it into a better product. In that case, you've got a couple of options. One, you can kind of just sit on the product, right? Keep your pricing intact, try to compete with the other sellers and try to move the product at as high of a profit as you can. Or you could just simply look to liquidate that product, start undercutting other sellers on the listing, and get your money back as quickly as possible. Now, depending on the situation, depending on how long I've been sitting on a product, I'm not afraid to take a loss on a product and aggressively liquidate to get my money back. Because if I know the product is a clear loser, there's no benefit, there's no point in me trying to hold out for another 2 months to make an extra $2 per unit, right? I'm way better off liquidating it, losing my shirt if I have to, but getting that cash back to then reinvest in a more profitable product. Now, on the other hand, let's say you send a product in, it's profitable, it's doing well. You got to decide how much of it you're going to buy and send back in. We use a very simple calculation. We don't have this crazy spreadsheet. We don't use a fancy inventory management software. We use a tool called Sellerboard, which I know you two are familiar with. Sellerboard does a really good job of giving you your financial metrics around your whole business and also all of your products at the product level, right? So I can see my finances at the level of each product. So let's say I'm looking at a particular ASIN. Sellerboard is telling me that ASIN is profitable, so I'm going to replenish it. Sellerboard will give you a velocity metric. So it'll tell you hey, over the last X amount of days, you sold on average, let's say 15 units per day, right? So all I'm going to do at that point is take that 15 units, that number of sales per day, multiply it by, I like to have anywhere from 30 to 45 days worth of stock on hand. So let's say I take that 15, I multiply it by 30 days. That'll give me 450 units. That's how many I need to order. And again, another good thing about Seller Board is it'll tell you the amount of time you have, like the number of days of stock that you have on hand. So it might say, hey, you're selling 15 units per day. You've got X amount in stock. So based on those numbers, you're going to run out of stock in, let's say, 21 days, right? And if I know that my supplier typically has a 7-day lead time, and then it's going to take me another 7 days to get it to Amazon and get it checked in, then I know that I'm going to need to place that reorder about 14 to 15 days out, right? To kind of time it perfectly with when I'm running out of stock and when that new stock checks in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it's a lot more simpler than what I think a lot of information that's out there, talks about.
Mm-hmm.
So we saved the most important questions for the very end. Number one, I was lucky enough to take the first wholesale challenge. I'm not involved. The listeners, I'm not involved on the back end at all. But I was an audience member, and but it's been several months. So probably the most important question of this entire episode is, how's George?
He's doing good. He's actually passed out on the floor right behind me. It's like monsooning outside my apartment right now. So he was, I don't know if you heard him yelping a little bit ago. He's kind of like cowering in the corner, but now he's just laying on the big beanbag, probably going to sleep there for the next 2 weeks. And for those of you that aren't familiar with George, if you took the wholesale challenge, you know exactly who George is, but he is my golden retriever puppy who is, he's the best. So you'll see him if you join us for the next challenge.
It's the content's great, but George steals the show sometimes.
Oh, he was the biggest bonus by far.
So, and then of course the other common question, or the most important question maybe, is again, we're approaching this from the beginner's perspective. So the big question is, how do I get the Lambo? How do you scale this, into what wholesale really can be? What I think wholesale, I mean, now private label of course can have huge numbers too, but wholesale, you can really do some damage. So tell me, how do I get a Lambo, Corey?
So, I mean, it really comes down to reinvesting your money over a number of years, right? Because at the end of the day, like we said earlier, wholesale is a capital intensive business. If you're starting a wholesale business with 5 to 10K, which is what we recommend, then, I'll be honest with you guys, and we might be shooting ourselves in the foot here. Obviously, we have a challenge coming up to sell, but like, you're not going to have a Lambo here in 3 years. You're probably not going to have one in 4 years. But what I like to tell people is you need to commit 3 to 5 years to this process. You've got to be willing to reinvest a lot of your money, because you won't grow if you're not reinvesting your capital. So if you want to take money out to buy a car, to do whatever, that's great. But just know that your growth is going to be a little slower as a result. So if you truly want to get to the point where, you're making tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars per year in net profit, even per month in net profit, it's going to take you multiple years to get there. So I say buckle up, be ready to put a lot of chips on the table and not take them off the table for a good amount of time.
Yeah, and I mentioned Lambo as a tongue in cheek. This
right.
Nothing about this is get rich quick,
no,
of course. But I'm always amazed at the parallels between arbitrage online, whether it be online or retail, best practices, and what you do with wholesale. It shares. The Venn diagram. They do cross. So. It's not as foreign a concept as some beginners may think it is. They're probably doing a lot of the techniques that they already are.
Yep, agreed. I mean, really, it's like we said, it's the same concept. The only difference, I think, the reason that, I think there's a lot of arbitrage sellers that they've been doing arbitrage, some of them for years, and they've always wanted to get into wholesale, but they've always been too intimidated. And the switch is just not as hard as people think, right? It takes a couple, you just got to have the right guidance, the right information, and then commit to taking that consistent action every day it doesn't take more than 30 days of consistent action. If you're hitting it every single day, you already have experience, you already know what brands you want to sell, to get a really solid foundation going for a successful, profitable wholesale business.
If there's anybody who's listening and does retail arbitrage right now, and you have a manager that text messages you when there's a sale or when you can come clear a shelf or whatever, there's no reason you should not have at least one wholesale account, because it's the exact same method. It's just talking to people.
And in that scenario, I mean, we know people that I think they kind of started out their wholesale journey that way. They were doing some backroom deals with some managers at retail stores, and then they started placing wholesale orders with those same managers, right? So not only, hey, can I clear out your entire, clearance section of the back room, but hey, by the way, next time you go to place an order with your supplier, with the manufacturer, do you mind if I throw you $5,000 to put in an order for me as well? Right? Not just like give them $5,000, but like buy 5,000 worth of product, basically piggybacking on their order, on their relationship. That's a way to implement wholesale if you're already doing retail arbitrage and you already have those relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the wholesale challenge. Who's it for, and what are you going to learn if you decide to join the wholesale challenge, which starts on the 22nd of January. Today's the 9th. So January 22nd, 2024 is when it gets rolling.
Yeah. So as far as who is the challenge built for? So the challenge is built for sellers of all skill levels, right? If you're a brand new seller, if you're an intermediate seller, if you're an advanced seller, I promise you will take away at least one, but more than likely a lot of nuggets from the challenge that will end up returning your investment tenfold, right? So that's who it's for. It really is for anybody looking to either start wholesale or add a wholesale component to their business. If I had to think like, all right, who is it a perfect fit for? It's somebody who's already doing arbitrage successfully to some degree, right? Whether you're doing retail arbitrage or online arbitrage. And like I said, you want to add that wholesale component to your business.
Yeah, that's perfect. And like I said, it gets started January 22nd. The price point on it is $647. If we're being completely honest, I am on the backside of the wholesale challenge. I handle a lot of stuff that Corey does all the work that requires a pretty face. I do all the emailing and things like that. We tried to price this at a point that makes sense for just about everyone. Now, that means it's really a lot cheaper than a lot of the other stuff that's out there. However, I don't think that you lacked in quality in any way. And then one of the other things about this challenge format that we've done with the OA challenge, the wholesale challenge, is I think that people, one, they show up a lot more because it's live for a certain period of time. In the wholesale challenge case, that's 7 days. And I also think that the community ends up getting a lot closer because they see each other more frequently. And one of the big takeaways out of the OA challenge, the wholesale challenge, is you kind of grow these relationships where you can lean on each other, you can do deals together, you can learn together, grow together, pick each other up when there's problems. To me, that's been one of the most rewarding things to see out of the entire challenge model that we've brought over to the Amazon space. So I'm just going to go ahead and just pitch it hard here. If you want to join the wholesale challenge, there's going to be a link below. It's wholesalechallenge.com. Go over there, check it out. Read the testimonials. Those are testimonials from people that are mostly unsolicited, that have been posted in the last wholesale challenge group over on Twitter. Go ask people on Twitter what they think about it. Go search the hashtag wholesale challenge, and you'll see a lot of information that's out there about it. Or reach out to one of us. We'll be happy to answer any questions you have about it if you're on the fence. But wholesalechallenge.com, make sure to go check that out. All right, and that is the pitch.
Yeah, and having both you two live, people say I'm biased, and I wouldn't be able to convince anybody that I'm not biased. But I mean, I do like and respect both of you a lot, and I could gush over how good the inaugural wholesale challenge was. And if there's readers of my newsletters, I've detailed that before, just how good it is. There's something about it, and Corey, it's commendable that you will hang out as long as it takes to answer every single question. Like that's like live is a huge advantage because you can literally, if you have that burning question, you can't get it answered. You can literally sit there on a live and your question will pop up across the bottom because you pull the quote up in the streaming software that you use. And you could literally see your question and watch it addressed live, which you can't do with a webinar, anything pre-recorded. It's you guys really do a great job, if I'm being completely honest.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank
appreciate that. I'm looking forward to it. So it'll be fun. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it will be. So, Chris, you pulled the quote of the week for this week, so I want you to go ahead and run with that.
I did. We're not straying too far from the Charlie Munger chain of quotes that we were using. I went to Warren Buffett for this one, and this, it's a classic. The quote is, "Someone is sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago." I like that quote because it highlights the importance of long-term planning, of patience, and most importantly, vision. And I thought it fit with this because I think it's also fitting that we're doing this in early January. So a whole lot of sellers have New Year's resolutions. They've kind of taken personal audits of their own business and their own goals. And I'd be shocked if a large percentage of sellers weren't sitting there going, okay, this is the year I'm going to jump into wholesale. So the timing is great. But that quote, it's a lot of the what you'll learn through the wholesale challenge and starting the wholesale. You're planting seeds. We talked about relationships and that text message that you got, the hot tip on a product that you were able to spend 5 figures on. Those seeds were planted before, long ago,
Yep.
and then you nurture it. So I thought that was a good quote for the topic at hand today.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Completely.
that is a good one. Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, they never miss. So
No, they don't. They know their stuff.
Right. Corey, thanks again for hanging out with us, man. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. Guys, that's the pod. We will see you guys in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to Clear the Shelf with Chris and Chris. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a screenshot on your phone and share to Facebook, Instagram, or your favorite FBA group, and be sure to tag me and let me know why you liked it and what you'd like to hear more from us in the future. Also, I'd like to give you some free gifts for listening. Head over to rabbittrailchallenge.com and repricerchallenge.com for some free courses to further your business. Thanks for listening.